Good morning. I am delighted to be here, and so many familiar faces, ex-students, folks that I've worked with before. Lovely to see you all again. For folks I've never met before, I am very grateful that VBA has extended this invitation to a much broader range of regulators, and that so many of you have chosen to come as guests. This creates for me my favorite audience, a whole room full of mixed up regulators. I don't mean personally mixed up, I mean mixed up across domains, and what that does is enables us, well, it gets me over the fact that I'm not an expert in your particular science, and you all have different sciences, and so actually it means that we end up focusing on the core essence of what it means to be a professional regulator, the things that bind you all together, the things that distinguish you at the same time from the rest of government. Wherever I go on Earth, I notice the habit of states and provinces to have a little motto on their registration plates. By the way, can you put my slides up, please? Just so that we're ready. Oh, and don't be put off by the fact that my computer thinks it's Sunday. That's because it's on East Coast time, American time. 3 o'clock this afternoon, it will realize that it's Monday. That's the schedule. So I'm traveling around Victoria. I noticed you've got a whole bunch of different license plate mottos. One, the most frequent seems to be "the place to be." Isn't that a bit arrogant? I mean, you guys obviously don't need to travel the world because you're already in the place to be. So that's the education state. I can't complain at that, of course, because I'm in academia, so we believe in education. I don't know if you know the topography or the geography of America, but I live in Boston, and 2 hours north I have a lake house. It's in the state of New Hampshire. Does anyone know the license plate for New Hampshire? No. It's live free or die. You know, if you can't be free, then life isn't worth living. That's the sense of it. And so any time I'm going up to my lake house and I start seeing more and more of these New Hampshire plates, live free or die, I think to myself, isn't there something in between? Isn't there some reasonable degree of restraint that you would accept, some modicum of limitations on your behavior, and life would still be worth living? It would perhaps be even safer, cleaner, healthier, and longer, certainly more civil. This is why we need regulators. It's neither live free or die. It's you create a perfectly sensible middle ground here. And I do spend, I guess the last 28, 29 years or so, I've been spending my life, professional life, mostly with professional regulators. I've learned a few things about them. That's about you as a breed. First of all, you're miserable people. Goes with the territory, there's conflict in your professional life. It's not about customer service. The people at the pointy end of your inspection or audit regime, they're not necessarily happy to see you. You are not exactly delivering services. It's not voluntary from their perspective. They don't get a choice of regulators like a customer does in the private sector. And you are not so much trying to please them as deliver obligations. In fact, on some occasions, you are creating for them a miserable experience by design. Carefully measured doses of misery in order to get them to behave precisely the way that you need them to behave in the public interest. And they're taking a loss, usually to their short-term private or economic interests. They're not necessarily happy about it at all. So inevitable conflict in the regulatory business. Some people say, oh no, well if you do it artfully enough, you can make everybody happy. Well, I think I can make a logical argument that if on any issue that you're dealing with, all the stakeholders, that there is a solution that makes every stakeholder group perfectly happy, then this is not an issue that requires regulation. This is one that you could let the market solve, because the market's very efficient at finding optimal solutions that satisfy stakeholders. So the whole point of regulation is somebody's usually being asked to behave properly, take a loss, and it's in the public interest. Second thing, we know about regulators is you're often not much appreciated by the public. There seems to be two states of the world that the public understand very clearly. One is there's a disaster yesterday, like a fire or a plane crash, in which case it's obviously a regulatory failure, and where were you? Why didn't you see it coming? Why was government asleep at the switch? Come on, better job of vigilance, better job of creative response. They understand that. And the opposite end of the spectrum, particularly on catastrophic risks, many of which you deal with, nothing bad has happened for as long as they can remember. In which case, regulation is suffocating the economy. Nothing useful. Nothing but a nuisance, and it's all about burden reduction, and let's have another red tape reduction little movement in order to make better environment for business, deregulation. So notice it's binary. It tends to be all one thing or the other. And part of the challenge for regulators, the communication challenge, the political management challenge, is getting the right level of alarm, sustainable over time, not depending on what did or did not happen yesterday. Third thing I've learned about regulators is there's precious little instruction available for you on how to do your jobs. I always feel I have to apologize for academia's missing the point. We've got lots of academics, tens of thousands of them around the world, that focus on regulatory policy. They tend to be lawyers, academic lawyers. They tend to be economists. They do cost-benefit analysis and risk analysis and all kinds of things, and then they try and write the perfect policy. And they seem to assume that once the policy is written, that what happens operationally is already determined, like you have no choice, that your world is sterile. I think you make an enormous difference. You're in a sandwich. Here's the policy as written. Here's frontline delivery of protections to the public, and you're the layer in between. And I don't think academia has paid any attention to the complexity of your lives and the range of decisions that you confront. And that's what we're going to spend all day today talking about. What it means to be a professional regulator, all the decisions that the public relies upon you to make. I'm happy to try and fill in this little omission of academia. And I find an enormous appetite in Australia. Because you have always royal commissions and reviews and reorganizations and regulatory tasks popping up and down from the Commonwealth level back to the states. And every time there's design choices and there's reinvention, the opportunity to think differently. So the ground here is fertile to understand the range of options available to you. The specific subject that is in the label for the day is what does it mean to be a risk-based regulator? This is very modern language. Some of the dilemmas that go with this language are not new, but the vocabulary is a little bit new. 10 years ago, the question would have been, what kind of regulatory reform should we produce? Although the language of regulatory reform is ambiguous. Do you mean reform the law? Or do you mean reform the agency? Or a bit of both? This is unambiguous. Notice what this doesn't say. I didn't say what does it mean to have risk-based regulation, because that would require a change in the legal framework. No, I'm talking about your lives. What does it mean to be a risk-based regulator? And you could read that two ways. You could read that as a question for your agency, or you could read it as a question for you personally. Do you want to be a risk-based regulator? Is your profession going to be about that? And by the way, is it possible that you could be a risk-based regulator if your agency wasn't? And if so, what kind of tensions would you expect it to produce? You can read it either way. One thing I've noticed lately, though, is lots of folks who are not actually regulators, not even government officials, applying to come on my courses, both at Harvard and through ANZOG. I should say, it was a great pleasure to have met Vincent on the course at Harvard just 2 weeks ago. I've been teaching this course over 30 years, and I'd like you to know that he was the best student ever. But it was also in the class of people who are not regulators, actually quite a lot of professional board members. these days. They're eminent in a lot of medical board members, like surgeons, eminent in their domain. They have risen up through the ranks, and then by virtue of their eminence, they get appointed or elected to a board. Now they have board responsibilities for the profession, which includes, by the way, discipline and excluding people and quality management and trying to govern all kinds of risks for their members and the environments in which they work. And they're novices at regulation. Brilliant at what they do, novices, so they make rookie mistakes as regulators. They want to come too, and other people who are in the risk control and harm reduction businesses. That's a very, very broad field, so I have to have more generic language that it makes them feel included. So let's just talk about what it really means to focus on your harm reduction or risk control aspects of your task. It's pretty simple. I like ordinary English. I'm an ordinary Englishman, so I like to keep the language simple. And we're going to talk this morning about design choices. If you really focus on your harm reduction task and you didn't already have an agency set up, then I'm going to give you the task of constructing one. What would you create? And so there's a sort of zero-based design scenario, which to you will feel entirely fictional. You don't have an agency. We worry about building standards and all the associated risks. I'm going to give you a budget of 100 million. You can hire 10,000 people of any kind. You can hire researchers and publish papers. You can hire ex-cops and do an inspection if you've got the political clout. You can run education and outreach. You can propose voluntary guidelines. You can enter partnership agreements or some weird mixture of all these things. What on earth will you create? There's an endless variety of design choices associated with the risk control task. Now, some folks say, well, don't waste my time with that, Professor, because my organization's already been designed. In fact, it's already been designed so carefully that when I applied for my job, they gave me like a 3-paragraph summary description of my precise role within this big existing machine, and I don't get any choice over that, and I don't need to hear about other options. Well, I think you might someday. Not today, maybe not this year, because you've already got a lot of changes underway at the VBA. But there's a landscape of possibilities around the particular design choice that has been made or that has been established historically. And from time to time, organizations get rattled. All kinds of things rattle regulatory agencies. A catastrophe will do it. The grant of an extended jurisdiction will do it. A big change in your budget, either up or down, will do it. Innovations appearing abroad that you're wondering whether to adopt, that will do it. Whatever it is, or a political wind blowing through, that will do it too. When you get rattled and you get a little bit of freedom, it's nice to know what your options are. It would be nice to know which way this agency wanted to move if you had the opportunity. This is advance work for the day when you next feel that freedom. And then it's nice to know the directions, the dimensions. It's nice to have a common vocabulary so you can have a sensible discussion quicker than if you're using words like risk-based regulation at cross purposes. So that's why, whatever the objections, we're going to talk about design options. I'm going to describe a range of fundamental dilemmas, all of which have implications in the context of what might it mean to be a risk-based regulator. This is not the setting to go around the room and say, what do you think is a risk-based regulator? If we did and took the time, I bet we'd get 20 different ideas. I can think of about 20, and we're going to focus on 7. The course is built around 7. Which seem to be the most profound and fundamental. This morning, I think we're going to cover 4. We'll see how the conversation goes. Here's the 7, a simple 1-sentence summary description of all 7 major dilemmas. There, did you get that? Speed reading contest. Of course you didn't get it. You'll get it later. All the slides, I'll send them along after we're done today. once we see exactly where we go with questions and things like that. This afternoon, there's a lot of freedom. These one-sentence summary descriptions really do not do justice to the profound nature of these choices. They're fundamental. I want to tease them out a bit slowly, and there will be an opportunity for you to help me do that. There will be roving microphones for those of you that are happy speaking up in a big room like this. And the good news is the lighting is so low, we can't see who you are anyway, which should liberate you even more. The first one, this is number one, and we're going to deal with probably two by coffee time. I'm in Australia. I have learned that you are a sporting nation. I have to use sporting analogies. Otherwise, I'm just not communicating with anyone. I understand that. This is a very simple question. This is not yet about strategy on the pitch. This is the simple question, where's the boundary line? The edge of the field of play. So you can think cricket, right? It's now these little plastic. You remember cricket? You guys used to be good at it. Till you took up cheating. But anyway, never mind what's happening on the pitch or what grit you've got in your pocket, but around the edge of these plastic advertising things, it used to be a rope ran the full length of the boundary, and it just defines the field of play. The whole game is played inside the boundary. Outside that's just the audience. This is never a trivial question for regulators because there's two kinds of behavior you might choose to control. There's people breaking the rules. You call that compliance management. If their behavior is in this set, this is a Venn diagram. If the behavior is in this set, then of course that's as much a statement about the current content of the law as it is about the behavior itself. Then there's people doing things which are harmful or risky, some of which are illegal, right? And again, people say, oh, Professor, you're a bit cynical. Surely they're better aligned than this. Surely our law is better than this. You've shown them so that this is really rather less than half of the right-hand circle, and likewise over here. Well, if they overlap a bit, and I will make the case that there's substantial stuff here and there, then I've got three areas, A, B, and C. Simple question, my friends, which is your business within the field of play for a regulator? And in what order of priority? And it's complicated. Let me just prove the case while you're thinking this through. Let me just prove the case that there's substantial stuff here. Well, there's probably some rules on the books which are obsolete because technology has moved along and you haven't been efficient in cleaning out the cupboard and getting rid of the old stuff lately. You should do that periodically. Maybe you haven't done it for a while. Maybe there's simple paper violations. You know this convention center? I bet they have to submit a form every month saying how many people are injured in this hall, and the answer is 0 again, because nearly everyone's sitting down and the professor managed not to fall off the stage. But the form is a day late. Well, that's non-compliant. It's a paper violation. I don't see anyone hurt directly by this particular kind of violation. Or take a skillful racing driver. What's his name? Scott Hamilton. Drives through your little village at 31 miles an hour, and the speed limit is 30 miles an hour. It's in the middle of the night. No one else is around. It is utterly, perfectly safe, but it's a violation nonetheless. The kind of thing you'd never even think about prosecuting. So you've got tons of stuff here, for sure. And over here, let's go over here. What did we learn in the wake of the global financial crisis? Americans, because of their sort of habits, desperately hunting people to prosecute and jail. Because if we can't do that, then the regulators look feckless. And I think the score so far is one. One person whose name no one's ever heard actually prosecuted and convicted for crimes related to the global financial crisis. But most of it wasn't about individual violations by banks. It was about unwise correlations in risk exposures, about credit default swaps, basically a gambling device. It was about fear and contagion rumbling across global markets and knock-on liquidity crises in different segments. And now we've learned to call that macro-prudential supervision to take care of systemically important institutions. And almost all financial regulators now have a new division focused on macro-prudential supervision. It's no more about violation by one bank as air traffic congestion is about a violation by an airline. Somebody's got to be governing at the bigger level, higher level realities, even if there's no violations, and that's a role for regulators. The latest thing in the financial sector, of course, we worried about flash crashes on stock exchanges caused by the interaction effects between high-frequency trading algorithms. Somebody's got to worry about it. That's all here too. So there's substantial stuff here, there's substantial stuff here. Oh, and lots of people die on the roads without having committed an offense. In fact, without anyone having committed an offense. Should the police not worry if no one committed an offense, or should we worry about road safety? Mechanical malfunction, that's not an offense. Inexperience, that's not an offense. Tiredness is not an offense. Have an epileptic fit or sneezing and shutting your eyes, none of these are offenses, but they kill people on the roads. That's all here too. A, B, C. Did you have figured out yet where you would begin? Yes, sir. You'd start right in the middle. Do you mind if I ask you your name? David. Is that your real name, or is he using a... David says B. Why?
Because the original field looks after itself most of the time.
Yeah.
And then we react to the harms that cross our path.
Yeah.
And we don't know the other harms, or we don't.
You don't know this.
Find them.
Yeah, or you don't have authority to go after them. But this you do. So this is convenient, right? It's important because it's in the right-hand circle. It's feasible because it's in the left-hand circle. It's been recognized in your law. You've got means, specific violations, and therefore probably money, resources, because the resources tends to go with the statutory authorities, right? David, thank you. I'm glad you said that one first because I labeled that one obvious. Just so you know, that was the single most high-risk moment of the whole morning. And David has rescued us from it, guided us wisely through. Thank you very much. Notice that just even saying that gives you one potential, rather straightforward idea of what does it mean to be a risk-based regulator. If you happen to be focused on compliance management, the left-hand circle, and you notice, as is inevitable, there's way too many violations, you can't possibly deal with them all. You must therefore prioritize the violations. One basis for doing it is on the basis of harm. You probably talk hazard and exposure, number of people at risk, and so on. You could use that as a way of prioritizing violations. By the way, notice it's only one method. There's other methods like culpability, deliberateness. That's quite different. You could use notions of justice and criminality. That's quite different. But you could use the magnitude and likelihood of risk as a way of prioritizing violations. Anyway, even so, that's the easy part. And then the second bit is a bit more difficult. Okay, you've done everything here in the middle. You've got, what's an average work week now in Australia? I know you're at like 35 hours and headed south. So 37. Where have you got to? Huh? 38. Okay, 38 hours in a week. 33, you've done everything in the middle here. You've got 5 hours a week left over, you and all of your colleagues. I want to make this an ugly, painful choice for you. You can't say, oh, I do a bit of each. I want you to choose. Where would you spend your extra 5 hours a week, you and all your colleagues? A bit more compliance work or a bit more harm reduction, if you had to make that choice? You understand the question? Do you? No, you don't. I have to warn you. Whichever one you can, I'm going to take a vote in a minute, show of hands. I want you to vote one way or the other, and not twice, and not zero. One vote. If you're faced with that choice, what would you say is the right thing to do? More compliance work or more harm reduction? I'll give you the precise form of the question in a moment because you really must pay attention to it. What will they say about you if you spend a lot of time here? What will they call you? And whichever one you're going to vote for, you're going to get insulted. It's just that the insults are quite different. So welcome to the miserable life of a regulator. What will they call you here? Bureaucrat, wasting our time, standing in the way of economic prosperity and development. Nothing but a nuisance. Get real, do something important. They'll call you obsolete, unreasonable, nitpicky bureaucrat. I don't know what the Australian language, what will they call you if you go over here and start inventing new jobs to be done that have not been recognized in the law, for which there is no explicit violation? Ultra vires? Nanny state, or the male version, big brother. Overstepping your authority, exceeding your authority. Yes, in America they love to say unconstitutional. They love their constitution even though it's hundreds of years out of date. Mission creep, unauthorized. I put up the word entrepreneurship, you know the French word, the derivation. It means to pick out, prôner, from among a range of options. Skillfully pick out from among a range of options. When a businessman does that, we celebrate them. They spotted an opportunity. You know the rule at Harvard about phones? If your phone beeps or squeaks or makes a noise, you, at 5 p.m. that day, you buy beer for everyone to compensate them for the distraction. So it's very nice little bars just down the road here. There's a lot of people in the room. Bear that in mind if you haven't put them on silent already. Now, where was I? Okay, so entrepreneurship, to pick out skillfully among a range of options. A businessman spots something that no one else has noticed, leaps in, makes money. We think that's good. The equivalent in the risk control space would be you see harm and loss occurring, and it's not part of your formal mandate, or it's somehow on the edge of your established jurisdiction. But as you look around all the other agencies in Victoria and Australia, you don't see anyone else taking care of this either. And you're creative and you've got some bright sparks work for you. You imagine some things that you could do. Should you or should you not leap in and do good? That's the question. And in this case, save lives or banks or whatever it is you're taking care of, the environment. So I put that up there just to tease you. Now here's the question. I'm going to give you a few more seconds to make up your mind. Faced with this choice, 5 hours a week, you and all of your colleagues, you're either going to, well, I guess the choice is, do you prefer to be an obsolete, unreasonable, nitpicky bureaucrat, or do you want to be an unauthorized mission creep going way beyond your mandate? And then you won't vote, will you? You'd like a positive frame. So the positive frame is you're going to do more compliance work or you're going to do more harm reduction. Here's the question, though. Faced with this dilemma, what's the right thing? Listen, what's the right thing for a public official to do in a democracy? Oh, there's a kicker. In a democracy. It's not a do anything you like country. It's a democracy. Understand the question? Ready to vote? You've got 5 more seconds to make up your mind. I want you to vote one way or the other, and without looking around you. There's no space for groupthink. I want to know what your convictions are here. Be bold. Hands up if you would vote for more compliance work. Hands up. Now. Okay, 37. Hands up if you would vote for more harm reduction. Wow, 204. Like 2080, roughly. Hands up again, the compliance people. And then please now keep up your hand if you're a lawyer. Actually, just a couple. Hands up lawyers that voted the other way. Oh, quite a lot of them. I'm very relieved. The reason I ask about lawyers is it is often, in many groups, it's often the lawyers that vote this way. And for very good reason, they are painfully aware of the legal jeopardy that sits waiting for you if you wander off into this space without anyone's permission. Business is going to haul you into court, and you have injunctions issued against you to cease and desist, and this isn't part of what we expected from you. Notice your rough proportions, like actually like 7 to 1, right? Which is more like, yeah, it's way up there, above 80%. Less than 90%, 85%, 15. Normally, this vote these days in similar countries, so I'm talking US, Canada, Britain, New Zealand, it tends to be 80-20 or 90-10 or 100-0 in some professions, particularly public health and sometimes the environment, because they're very aware of all kinds of risks that don't really seem to hinge on violations. That's the way the world is going these days. Now, I'm not going to recommend anything to you. I'm going to be very careful today. I'm not pushing you any direction on any of these dilemmas. I just want you to recognize that they're there. These are all dimensions, and you can move. It would be jolly nice to know where you sit as an agency right now, and if you had the chance to move, have you agreed which way you ought to move? You've got some disagreement here, 80-20 or 85-15. You might want to talk it through. This is a perfectly serious choice. I picked out a couple of recent quotes from the financial services sector. I don't know if you know who Mick Mulvaney is, if you've heard of him, if you follow American politics. It's an alternate to watching comedy shows. But Mick Mulvaney is, under the Trump administration, acting director of this very controversial consumer protection, quite aggressive it has been in the wake of the global financial crisis. He is also, at the same time, budget director at OMB for the Trump administration, and now he's just on his way to become chief of staff in the White House. But he was at this role long enough to go through a strategic planning cycle. And the strategic review said this. If there is one way to summarize the strategic changes here, it's this. We've committed to fulfill the Bureau's statutory responsibilities, but go no further. What I didn't tell you is that these circles have names. This is called the legal model of regulation, where you're focused on law and compliance. And this is called the expert model of regulation, which sounds like a good thing. But it doesn't mean it. It means when regulators deem themselves to be the experts. It means literally put on the mantle of expert. And of course, not everybody agrees that you're the experts or that you have the right or that your knowledge is any better than this. But legal or expert, what does this sound like? Legal. Why would he say this? Well, I love this, it's kind of English language. By hewing to the statute, this plan provides a touchstone with a fixed meaning. That serves as a bulwark. Talk about mixed metaphors. Bulwark is like how you defend castles in European wars. Makes me feel quite at home. Serve as a bulwark against the misuse of our unparalleled powers. How about that? In other words, rein it in. His job is to rein it in. That's why he's put in charge of it. Now, we're going to refocus the Bureau's mission, and that's going to be regulating consumer products and services under existing consumer financial laws. And of course, whatever we're going to do judiciously. You can't argue with that. That's all perfectly fair game. And then I think he makes a mistake. Educating and empowering consumers to make better informed financial decisions. Is that legal or expert? He's just stepped off into the expert circle. Quite interesting, why would he do that? I think because this is actually written in the agency's mandate. So he's sort of quoting it. If he was really determined to keep this utterly legal, let's go the first 5 words here. Could he have educated and empowering consumers? Stop. Finish the sentence some other way and it remains utterly legal? I think he could. If he had said, and educating and empowering consumers to identify and report non-compliance, then he would have stayed utterly in the left-hand circle, but he's now got a new discovery apparatus, public that's vigilant on their behalf and reporting things. But no, he said this. Well, switch to the other bottom side of the earth, and you know Jim Shipton is the new, fairly new chairman of ASIC, just been through the misery of a royal commission. What does he say about this? This is one of his speeches in April last year. We must also recognize that a regulatory system is not just supported by formal rules, but by norms, industry practices, and community expectations. Everyone in finance should be asking not just if it's legal, but whether it's the right thing to do. Legal or expert? Pretty clear statement that this is, he wants to hold open the expert version of the mission. In fact, it gets even more explicit. Our job is to modify behavior with respect to agreed norms. An important aspect of this is the identification and management of harms. My language is deliberate. Ultimately, a regulator should be focused on harm prevention, legal or expert. It's about the clearest statement from an executive that we are committed to the expert vision that I have heard in a long time. And it's coming from an organization during a period when it is under a severe criticism for not having been sufficiently legal. So this is actually quite courageous. During such a period, even while we were making corrections on our legal front, and our likelihood of taking enforcement against big institutions, at the same time to hold open the expert vision. That will take some defending from him. So I'm not pushing you one way or the other. You'll notice the express preference over here by majority vote. This is the way the regulatory world is moving. I'm not pushing you in that direction, but a lot of people go off in this direction and they don't realize they're doing it. And they do the most fabulous harm identification and creative risk control work, and they even get great results. And then somebody challenges the agency. What does the agency then do when challenged? You run back to the general counsel's office, who pulls out the law and says, are we within our rights? And it's not entirely clear. Well, that's a shame. In other words, you're doing this work, you learn to do it, but you're not taking credit for it. It's not an agreed deal between you and the industry. It's not agreed between you and the minister. It's not agreed between you and the public. If you are going to do this, do it explicitly. Talk about it, explain it to people. Because if you do go expert model and you do it explicitly, it changes everything about the conduct of a regulatory agency from start to finish. Start, the data that you gather. If you're going to go expert model, you will want to be gathering data about all kinds of behaviors and risks not covered by your existing rules. So it's a much broader data gathering enterprise. Your analytic operation, you'll be looking for clusters and trends and patterns and things anywhere in the circle, no matter which side of this line they fall. A broader range of analytic techniques. If you're going to operate in this space where you don't have law available, what methods will you use? The answer is all the methods for changing people's behavior other than enforcement. And that is a very long, long list. Education, outreach, guidance, naming and shaming people in the press, even if what they're doing is legal. If it's irresponsible but legal, you can still use that. You can mobilize private sector lawsuits. You can search around for other regulators that actually cover this with one of their legal circles. A lot of things you can do. You can use all the research coming out of behavioral economics and experimental psychology, colloquially called nudge, ways of framing decisions so people do more sensible stuff anyway. without the force of law or coercive power of the state. There's a lot of tools available over here. If you're going to go this way, they must be recognized. They'll be part of your hiring program. That'll be part of your training program. It'll be part of your HR operation. Make sure we are properly and skilled in all of these other methods. Finally, I think when you issue your annual report, what will that look like? Well, what's an annual report feel like if you're in the legal model? What's it all full of? Lots of statistics about your enforcement operations. It's mostly outputs. It'll be inspection program, audits opened and closed, cases opened and closed, maybe the conviction rate, maybe the fines, maybe the number of people excluded from the industry one way or another. That will be the activity that you summarize and describe here. What would be the outcome that goes with a legal model approach? Interesting question. A lot of regulators can't actually measure the outcome of a legal model. What would be the ultimate outcome? High? No, not fear. That's merely a device. That's an instrument in your hands to be used carefully. No, it would be the compliance levels that you manage to achieve. Do you know what the compliance levels are in the industry on various issues? Well, you'd only know them if you knew how to do a representative sampling with a deep audit. You can't possibly ever get such statistics from a focused or targeted program, because that's a bias that you introduce. So you'd need to know that you could measure compliance rates with some validity. But if you're expert model, then what's your annual report going to say instead? Or not so much instead, but certainly as well. It's going to be a collection of project-based accounts about risks you identified, how you knew that was an issue, the metrics that you relied upon, what you did in each case, what happened as a result. It will be a collection of accounts to the public about risks you identified and controlled, one way or another. Very different. I'm not pushing you one way or the other. If you're going to go that way, which seems to be your majority preference, realize what you're doing. Make sure everybody else understands not only what you're doing, but what the implications are for different aspects of your business, because they are really very profound. This simple one-sentence summary, legal or expert, if you're making notes before you get the slides, that's all that this one is. Most agencies are drifting to the expert model these days. Some folks say, oh, Professor, why is that happening? Why is it that we're all going this way? Do you have any formal research on that question? No, I don't have formal research on that question, but I talk to a lot of regulators. I don't know if that counts as formal research. Don't think it does. But I have two hypotheses, and maybe you've got some as well. I have one hypothesis is that we have seen enough disasters lately over here, clearly over here, where the public's expectation of governments to understand them ahead of time and be ready seem to have increased substantially over 2-3 decades. You've got the floods in Brisbane. You've got forest fires out of control. You've got natural disasters that hit. So that's nothing to do with transgressions. And the public has very strong expectations of the government to be ready, to provide a joined-up response, to have done sensible contingency planning. There's a much broader, and even if there's no one to prosecute after the global financial crisis, government should surely have seen it coming. That's the sense we get from the public. That's hypothesis one. Hypothesis two is about the vocabulary that we use these days. We're all talking about risk management. We have the risk sciences, serious study. We have societies for risk analysis. We have a serious study of human perception of risks and why they take crazy risks and understand some better than others, and biases and heuristics. All of that is happening. If you are talking the language of risk management, which circle are you in? Puts you automatically in the right-hand circle. Unless you add 2 words and say risks of non-compliance, in which case you have artfully put yourself back in the left-hand circle, patterns of non-compliance. Anyway, that's number 1. Anybody, I give you various moments during the day. Some people come to an event like this determined to make a speech when the opportunity arises. We have rules about speeches. We welcome them, but they're limited to 1 minute, and you have to stand up. Any speech prepared on this subject? Or shall I go on to number 2? So if you're just writing shorthand, legal versus expert, the drift to the expert model. Number 2, I'm going to show you a different chart. But before I let you look at it too long, I have to tell you what it is. I've been at the Kennedy School 30 years now, much longer than I thought I would be there. That's long enough to notice institutional habits. We have one, which is very obvious to the faculty. When a professor publishes a book, they are obliged to offer a lunchtime seminar for all the other professors. This is a very nice thing. It only takes an hour. They come along. They hear it from the author, they get to ask their favorite questions, and they get to eat lunch as well. Very efficient with respect to time management, and of course they now don't have to read the book because they can stand up in front of their very large classes at Harvard and pretend that they've read them all because they've heard it from the author. Last count, there were 76 books a year coming out of the Kennedy School, rolling average, and the truth of the matter is they've not read any of them, they just had 76 lunches. Good deal. I understand the value. When I published The Carrot of Harms, which you have some extracts from, I think, in your readings, 2008, I stood up like a good citizen and offered my lunchtime seminar. A bunch of my colleagues came, some friends and some others. And I had prepared 10 PowerPoint slides, thinking that would be plenty just to get a conversation rolling, and this was the very first one, and in fact, I never got past this first one. This caused mayhem, absolute mayhem, and a lot of anger in certain circles amongst my faculty colleagues. And it's pretty, we love to say discuss, like it's an exam essay question, but, no, I'm not going to have you write an essay. I will let you discuss. We'll pass the roving mics around in a moment. But it's pretty simple what we've got here. I got bad things down the left-hand side, a variety of social ills that you might seek to control, and some of them are regulatory space. Some of them aren't really. Poverty reduction is still a social ill, still to be controlled, but we don't think of that as much of a regulatory job as corruption, crime, pollution, or discrimination, nor do we think that generally about disease. And then on the right-hand side, as far as I could find them in the English language, if I could find them, antonyms. The opposite, the good thing. Where, more highway safety means less accidents and more accidents means less highway safety, sort of opposites, as far as I could find them. They're not all perfect antonyms because there aren't perfect antonyms in the English language for some of these. I'd like you to imagine for a moment that they are all perfect antonyms. And now I'm going to ask you the zero-based design question. So, are you going to pick one of these? Like I want you to address, pollution of many different types. And I'm going to give you a handsome budget and complete choice as to how you set things up. My question is, about the organizational design and therefore the operations that will be carried out. Does it make any difference whether you focus on the bads to be reduced or the goods to be promoted and expanded? Or is it in fact the same, just using different language to describe it, like two sides of the same coin? And I just posed this question to my faculty colleagues who represent a variety of different academic disciplines. I'll tell you which ones in a bit after you've had a chance to respond. And they have the most extraordinary range of responses to this, and anger at me for asking this question. from one particular group. So what do you think? So here's the question. We've got a mics that can go around. So who's carrying mics around for us today? Thank you ever so much. 5, 7 random observations. So here's the question, be precise. Does it make an operational difference which side you focus on? Yes or no? And if it does, which side then do you prefer? If yes, then which side do you prefer? Rosemary, you start off.
Thanks, Malcolm. I think I'm a big fan of enlightened self-interest.
Yes.
I think that's a terrific motivator. I don't have a problem with people doing well as long as it has a broader social benefit. I think if you promote the positive, you're going to... So I'll argue against myself now, but I think if you promote the positive, you're going to encourage people to behave in a particular way because it's good for them.
So you say, well, first of all, you've jumped over the first half of the question, which was, does it make an operational difference? I think I'm hearing, yes, it does.
Yes, I think it does.
And now you're saying you prefer the right-hand side.
Yes.
Because the promoting of positive behaviours is somehow more effective.
If people can see what's in it for them, which in fact could operate on either side,
Yes.
but I think if people see a positive, which is good for them and has the consequence of having a broader positive result,
Then this is further reaching
yes.
and therefore more resource efficient.
Yes, I think so.
Okay, so I got one vote so far for they're different operations and we prefer the right. Other points of view? Gentleman, second row here. Don't know your name.
Thank you. My name's Alan.
Alan.
It does make a huge operational difference, the right-hand column.
Yep.
Just from a very basic, what the brain focuses on, actions follow. Just from that point of view, an entire organisation will totally change.
So another vote for the same conclusion.
Yes.
That they're different operations and you prefer the right. You want to invest in the right.
Yes.
You want to set up your organisation around promoting good behaviours.
Internally and for a vision and a
Okay.
mission.
Got it. Other views? I'm hoping there will be at least one different view. Gentleman behind you over there.
Thanks, Malcolm. My name's George. The material on the left that allows us from the readings to do the definition and then going to working what the problem is and where the knots are and have a different approach. So I'd go for the left side.
So you're also making the assumption that they're quite different operations,
Yes?
and you prefer the left because it's somehow you can define problems precisely and then tackle them one by one.
Yeah, that sounds familiar premise, yes.
Yep. Okay. Different view. Lady right here at the front.
I would say that I've seen a shift from one side to the other. So if I use the example of responsible gambling,
Yes.
so there's been a big focus on responsible gambling, raising awareness, harm to punters.
Yes.
But what we've seen in the research is
Yes.
that there's a growing body of evidence that at-risk gamblers are experiencing increasing harm.
Yep.
And so we've shifted the language to speak about gambling harm rather than responsible gambling. And I would say that operationally we've seen people think differently when we have shifted from responsible gambling, making sure the right processes are in place and the licensees are doing what they should be doing, to now looking at the quality of those processes in venues when we think about it from a harm. Well, we always think about it from a harm, but when we talk about it as gambling harm.
So in sequence, you're saying, first of all, these are different behaviours, these are different operational methods. You're noticing a change over time, and it's shifting which way, from left to right?
No, so from right to left.
Going from right to left.
Yes.
If I was going to say, so if you identify within the gambling arena problem gamblers, and focus on problem gamblers and how to either stop them doing that or to mitigate the consequences for their family and friends. Is that a left or a right-hand side focus?
Well, I'm not gonna, okay.
You know too much. Folks, is that a left-hand side focus or a right-hand focus? It's a left-hand side focus. We have identified carefully a problem in relation to gambling, that of problem gamblers. And by the way, then we create the most fabulous array of methods to intervene, you know, timing out and not allowed to gamble faster than this rate, and lots of warning signs, and people voluntary self-exclusion from casinos and so on. So we've got a whole panoply of tools available, but it's organized around a left-hand side focus. And that's growing, you think, the left-hand side focus? More careful description of gambling problems.
Yes, I think it is growing, and I think we better understand, because we've got more data and evidence, that it's not just problem gamblers.
Right.
There's a larger cohort that we need to be focused on.
So I have to apologize for my choice of words is maybe not ideal. Some people say, oh, well, this stuff on the left is automatically responsive or enforcement-centered. It's reactive, and that the preventive programs are over here on the right. That's kind of a defect of the language. If you say a crime has been committed, then you assume that all that's left is the possibility of reacting to it. So that would give you that intuition. But if that had been more fully described as a crime problem, just like a gambling problem, just like a highway safety problem, and I'll give you a crime problem. Let's imagine that parents in Melbourne, their kids can't keep a bicycle for more than 3 months without it getting stolen. So we recognize a crime problem. Now, you could take a reactive enforcement-centered approach to that crime problem. You could go hunt down the bicycle thieves in their vans at night and prosecute them. Or you could advise parents how, when to teach the kids not to leave bikes, or not to use private bikes, but to use public bikes, or hand out big chains everywhere, lock them all up. You could have a purely preventive approach is an option once you've focused clearly on the left. So the intuition that this is reactive and that's preventive is not reliable, although an awful lot of what does happen over here are big, broad outreach programs. Any more views which are amazingly different that you'd like to get? My friend Dave here has a comment. He rescued us earlier, so he'll probably do it again.
Yes, the discussion is good because you learn something as you go. I initially would have said that the right-hand side informs the left, but now the left gathering the information that identifies the left helps to inform the right.
So there's feedback between the two.
Absolutely.
And which way is the feedback going? Which side?
The identification of the left column is what actually informs the right column.
Oh, so you do your accounting and analysis and risk identification on the left?
Absolutely.
And then that informs which programs you might drive on the right?
And then the circular outcome is that it assists with the left. The right assists with the left because the education, or whatever it may be, in the case of education, once you identify the issues, then you go through and you educate, and then it comes back and the ignorance becomes less.
Okay. So one voice we're missing here. No one's been prepared to say that these are in fact the same. There is no operational difference. Anyone want to make that argument? Gentlemen right over there, and actually 2, 3, they're all gathered over there for some reason. It's prepared to make that argument. I want to hear that one.
Hi, my name's Ruben. The right is predicated on the fact that most people will do the right thing, but unfortunately, mostly harm is focused on the 1% that will continue to do harm, regardless of all outreach program you're going to propose. So I would say that the most harm comes from focusing on the left, because unfortunately it's one of the very, very few rotten apples that cause harm to the majority.
Then you're not making the argument that I just summarized.
Yeah.
You're saying, I hear you, I think what I heard you say is that these are quite different, and that if you have a program to promote integrity, to teach the right values, to do your annual conflict of interest declaration, all of the standard stuff that everybody has to do to remind themselves how not to be corrupt, this will affect most people quite well, but there's a few that won't listen. And they are deliberate non-compliers, and you need something else for them, right? That reinforces the notion that they're different operations and that you've got to balance the two. Gentleman in the corner there,
Yes, hello, my name's Keith.
Keith.
I guess the feedback goes both ways, and how do you identify, for example, corruption without knowing what integrity is? So really, they're sort of two sides of the same coin. How do you actually decide, probably the corruption's the easiest example to use. Corruption is not having integrity. So to me, they're sort of, when you're looking at left and right, it's sort of almost not an artificial difference, but it's really just two ways of looking at the same problem.
Okay. And that one is one where people tell me it's not a perfect antonym. They actually say that there's more to integrity than the absence of or resistance to corruption. Just as folks say there's more to wellness than the absence of disease. Well, I asked you to imagine that they were perfect antonyms. But even so, I take your point. This, you might have a positive program here that drives most people and won't drive everybody. Okay, there was another gentleman right close to the back, last row but one. Last comment, and then I'm going to take you back to my faculty seminar room.
Hello, my name's John. I think you need both of them working together to actually get a perfect synchronising.
Then you're not making the argument that you're supposed to be making, which is that there's no
No,
difference between
what
them.
I'm saying is they're both exactly the same as each other because they're both essentially the problem. So, for example, if you've got, let's say, ignorance, why are people ignorant? Because they're uneducated. So essentially, we're not here just to point out a problem. We're a regulator. If we're going to point out a problem, we may as well be on social media like every one of those people who have an opinion on everything. We're here to actually change. We're here to ensure that people are safe no matter what they do. So essentially, with ignorance and education, they come hand in hand. So neither are more important or any different to each other. It's one sole goal that you're going for at the end of the day.
And you're focusing on this one. I should point out that these rows don't all behave the same way. And they actually have quite different implications in terms of whether there is or is not a regulatory function at all. We don't normally have laws against ignorance. That's a peculiar one. Ignorance is mostly identifiable pieces of education, either formal or social, that turn out to be missing. It's rather, this one is sort of curiously the opposite of this one. Accidents here is the real thing, and safety, some folks would say, is merely the absence of accidents. Here, education is the real thing, constructed block upon block with an architecture, and ignorance seems to be, well, missing bits of it. I know that this is a real thing. I mean, how many of you have had an accident on your way home? Or even if you didn't have an accident, you almost had an accident on the way home. It had a date and a time and a place. And by the way, a rush of adrenaline because somebody changed lanes in front of you, or a pedestrian in a dark clothing stepped out off the side and you only just saw them in time. And then you get home and you say to your partner or spouse, I had a near miss on my way home. And you can describe the whole thing. How many of you got home at the end of your commute and said to your partner, oh, I had a real experience of safety on the way home today? It'd be hard to imagine such a thing. Actually, I have imagined one. I once got home and said, I had an experience of safety. I didn't use quite those words. But there was a stretch of road on my commute that was two lanes each way. It was too narrow. There was no center divider. People were breaking the speed limit all the time. It was a recipe for head-on collisions. And then one day they put up a central barrier. I experience this now as safe. Why do I experience the safety and actually feel it? Answer, a risk has been removed. I am so totally aware of the risk and now it's gone. That's the sort of closest you get to an experience of safety. Anyway, very interesting comments, all perfectly plausible. People do respond in different ways. I'm going to go back to my faculty seminar. At the Kennedy School, the biggest single academic discipline we have is microeconomists. Hands up, economists in the room. No, nothing to be afraid of. You don't. I have nothing against economists. I'm surrounded by them at the Kennedy School, so I learn their language. I listen to them a lot, but I am not one. I was a mathematician by training. Now the economists are angry with me. They say, Sparrow, stop it. You're just messing with the signs. Plus times plus, they say, more of a good is the same as minus times minus. At least mathematically speaking, there is no distinction. And so if, as an economist, most of your policy work is to understand people's utility functions, which as rational actors they are trying to optimize, then if you dress up your whole utility function with minus signs rather than plus signs and then optimize the whole thing, you will in fact get the same policy conclusion. That's their argument. So they say, stop it. It's the same. And I say, it's not the same. These are different operations, as most of you have assumed. And they say, no, it's absolutely the same. And then if I push back on them, they will draw a picture in the air. It's really very predictable. And they'll say, look, there's bad behaviors over here that you don't like, and there's good behaviors over here that you do like. There's a boundary between them, which you're trying to move, in this case, that way. What does it matter whether you move the boundary by identifying good behaviors here and promoting them, extending them, push, or identifying bad behaviors here and eliminating them, pull? They say this is precisely the same operation. And I say it isn't. And by the way, yes, when I studied mathematics at Cambridge, I learned that if you have a theorem and you've just told me what it is, and I want to utterly disprove it, I only need one counterexample. And I'm going to pick this one because it's my favorite one, the public health sphere, because it is so rich and complicated professionally, and it is divided internally into different professions, some of which are promoting goods and some of which are identifying and understanding bads. And of course, they're not independent from each other, but they're utterly different professions. What does a wellness program feel like? What happens in a wellness program? Chances are there's a big classroom full of people at some teachable moment in their life, like even kids in school, or it could be, newly arrived Pacific Islanders and you're trying to get them all healthy, or it could be that you've just joined a government agency and you're going to join our wellness program, and on your way out, please pick up your gym pass. We're going to keep you well whether you like it or not, because that's one thing we're supposed to do. And the standing up the front is a nurse or an educator. What is the subject of discussion in a wellness program? It's mostly about disease prevention and things that you can prevent. So therefore, we are focusing on what are called lifestyle choices that have health implications. And so the subjects for discussion are all about sensible sleep patterns and behaviors and stress identification and reduction techniques, and a lot about cardiovascular health, how to keep fit and lean, obesity avoidance, and conditions related to obesity, such as late stage, second stage type 2 diabetes and so on. So it's about disease, but we are actually mostly encouraging a set of positive behaviors that are generally helpful. Does this affect disease control? I'm having yeses and nos. Yes, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it. It surely contributes to disease control. Which diseases? All diseases or just some diseases? some specific diseases, those that are susceptible to these lifestyle choices and substantially affected by them. So it is about obesity and obesity-related conditions. It is about cardiovascular fitness and health. Are there diseases that we don't ever discuss in a wellness program because there's no point? Yes, like genetic predisposition to certain cancers won't get discussed. You don't normally talk about cystic fibrosis or multiple sclerosis, things that are not about how you normally conduct your life. So there are diseases not touched by this, and meanwhile over here on the left there's another set of people, a whole profession called epidemiologists, who are utterly focused on the left. Now what do? They don't work in a classroom. Where do they work? In a laboratory. They don't wear suits and ties because they're teachers. They wear lab coats, or on some days hazmat suits, because they're dealing with dangerous stuff. What do they, if you understand, to understand what they're doing, look at their bench and the instruments on it. What's the one instrument that they all have on their bench? Every epidemiologist must have a microscope. The modern answer is a computer, because they do data analysis and monitor, who's Googling flu symptoms too often and who's buying too much aspirin in the pharmacies, just so they can detect outbreaks. Yes, but the traditional answer is a microscope. Why do they have microscopes? We didn't need them for a wellness program. What's under the microscope? Bad stuff. Plain English. Viruses, pathogens, bacteria, diseased tissues, tumor cells, or something that supports a disease enterprise, like mosquitoes that transmit the Zika virus, or like capillary systems that support early tumor cell development. A lot of research in that domain at the moment. And they do look at good stuff under the microscope also, but usually just for the purposes of comparison. It's mostly study of the disease and the way the wretched thing works. Why do they want to study so intently and carefully the way this disease operates? So that they can write nice descriptive journal articles in their favorite refereed journals. They do that too. But that's not the purpose. What is the purpose? They want to figure out how it works so that they can mess with it, defeat it, destroy it, interfere. They are actually searching. They want to know the mechanism so that they can sabotage it. Find out something that the disease mechanism depends upon that we can touch. A nub, a pivot point, right? A scarcity that we can create. If it relies on mosquito transmission and you can remove all the mosquitoes, like they did in Cuba, because they could, we've won. If it relies on a certain mechanism for transmission from mother to child and we can cut that connection, we've won. If we can figure out a ring containment strategy, stop it moving from region to region, we've won. If we can find a vaccine that's available and survives hot and cold temperatures and doesn't have nasty side effects, then we've won, as long as we can get the uptake rate to a critical mass. How many of these do you need? One. Sabotage is incredibly efficient. They are searching for opportunities, creative sabotage, having understood the bad itself. Very careful focus on the left-hand side. My book, The Character of Harms, was nearly called, I wanted to call it The Sabotage of Harms. But the editor at Cambridge University Press said, that's a bit weird. No one will know what that's about. And he preferred The Character of Harms. It turns out that's a bit weird too. Still no one knows what it's about. When you've read it, then you know what it's about. It's a bit of a problem, really. Anyway, so I think I've defeated the microeconomists again. This is not the same as that. But if you understand that these are different now, which one do you prefer, epidemiology or wellness programs? And the answer is obvious in the public health field, right? We like them both. They play quite different roles. They are utterly different. No one should ever say these operations are the same, and therefore there is a balance to be struck between them, right? Well, you've just arrived logically at a very particular point. If they are in fact different operations in all of these areas, and they're both valuable but in different ways, then there's a balance to be struck. Well, simple observation at this logical point in the argument, your balance could be off. Your balance could be off either way. What would it feel like if it was off one way or the other? Well, these do tend to be broad outreach programs, sort of widecast, reaching a lot of people and hopefully sitting well with their natural disposition and increasing their understanding, and they're going to be sort of voluntary partners and compliers. That's going to do a lot of good for you. And then, of course, your integrity program doesn't get everybody. Your environmental stewardship program doesn't deal with all polluters. And you'll have extra work, quite different work to do to go down the left-hand side, identifying the pockets of harm and misery left behind. So I have I like analogies because they work well. The right-hand side, big, broad, positive, and usually preventive programs, they drive out the tide of harm for you. That's a nice idea, isn't it? There it is, mostly gone. But after the tide has been driven out, what do you have left? I just did the beach walk on Saturday from Coogee to Bondi and back again. You've got rock pools and swimming pools and all kinds of things in between left after the tide has gone out. And if you leave them long enough, they each have their own ecosystem. So one piece of work is, yes, by all means drive out the tide and then go identify and mop up all of the unique little bits left behind, and don't imagine for a minute that this covers everything. So they're quite different. And I'm not going to push you one way or the other. I'm just going to say, do you know where your balance lies? And does it seem to you about right? And the last time I asked that question with a single agency group here in Melbourne, the lady who was running the event, in charge of it, said, oh, I think we are about like 95% here and 5% here. And without any prompting at all from me, she said, and that's not right. We need to move this balance. It's a complicated task to figure out which of your activities are there here and which of your activities are there. I think it's just a useful exercise, and you should move this balance carefully, slowly, incrementally, review it maybe once every 3 or 5 years. But it's a basic feature of your organizational design. People tell me that, as an ex-cop, all of my habits would sit here. I have the habit of focusing on the bad, wanting to take enforcement. That's what they expect from a cop. Some people who say, they are different and I absolutely want to do this, say to me, I like the right-hand side because I'm a warm and positive and encouraging person. To which I say, well, in that case, I'm extra happy to meet you. I like warm, positive, and encouraging people. And that might determine where you sit best in your agency. But that should not determine the design of your agency. You need people on both sides, warm, positive, good communicators, outreach, and you need your epidemiologists understanding harm and misery and loss and figuring out a way to intervene case by case. So that's the organizational design implications of this very strange and simple puzzle. I don't find anyone in the risk control business talking about this. This is chapter 1 of my book because I think it's absolutely fundamental to the way we set up harm control or risk control missions. The second, I would, just before the coffee break, which is coming up soon, I will mention a second group at the Kennedy School, political scientists. It's the second biggest piece. How do you think they would respond? What are their interests? They want to know how you build constituency and support for your operation or your campaign or your agency, what language works best to mobilize people in support of your endeavor? However valuable, however well or badly conducted, what gets people on your side? That's what they're thinking. Does this matter in that context, in the context of political communication? I think it does. I've been in America long enough to notice a strange thing about American politicians. They love to declare war on things. Because, you know, sometimes social ills and occasionally nations. And declaring war is seen as bold and decisive and therefore admirable. But what they will declare war on from this list will depend very much on their big P party politics, right? And I don't really understand the way you name your parties. You call conservatives liberals, which is just wrong. But left wing or right wing works pretty well all around the world. So who will declare war on crime? That's a right wing agenda. What is the left wing story on crime control that's a bit different? Different attitude if you're left wing. Bit more sympathetic to the offender as a victim of their own circumstances and, you know, lack of opportunity and poverty and malnutrition in the womb and early lead exposure. That's why they commit crime. Yeah. Slightly different view. Who will declare war on pollution? That's a left-wing political agenda. Why cannot the right wing ever declare war on pollution? Because it's their friends in business who are doing it. Or it's seen as a little bit, you know, too anti-industry a posture for the right wing to comfortably adopt. Who will declare war on poverty? That's an even further left-wing agenda, right? What's the right-wing view on how you control poverty? Get a job, as they say in Australia. But in general, it's let's focus on promoting economic prosperity. If we do this, then that will, you know, we'll have taken care of that along the way. It automatically follows. Where you have water analogies for this. To use trickle-down economics. Is that the theory? That's what they call it in the US. If you live in a Mediterranean country, it's a bit different because you sit in the harbor and watch the tide go up and down all day long. They say rising tide lifts all the boats. I know some poverty scholars because we used to have some at the Kennedy School. They've gone now. They say it's not true. Rising tide lifts all the boats except the ones with very short anchor chains. They're stuck, can't rise, even while the tide is rising. Horrible image. They say that's what we study. We study them. They're called poverty traps, the ones that can't rise even while everyone else is doing better. And they can't rise because there's a mechanism in place. There's a dynamic that locks them in a poverty trap. That's why we call them traps. Physical idea, a trap. Sometimes it's a dynamic trap. And they've got a classification system for poverty traps. Go read the poverty literature and listen to the kind of language. It's actually rather fascinating. First of all, how do you classify poverty traps? Some of them are classified by the mechanism and by the scale. So there are some poverty traps that lock a family in poverty and will even transmit to the next generation. Often, a mental health poverty trap is one. High fertility poverty trap is well known in some countries. In America, healthcare costs-induced poverty trap is a real thing because our system is so crazy. Some of them are bigger scale. They will lock a whole village or town in poverty even while the region is doing better. The most famous one of those is loss of the local industry. This whole town was built next to the steel mill or the shipyard or the coal mine. And that thing is now shut, and so there's no jobs and not enough labor mobility. That locks the whole town in poverty for many, many decades in some cases. Listen as they now talk about the poverty traps, some of which are static, some of which are dynamic. What language do you hear from the poverty scholars? What do they want to do to poverty traps? or to the cycle of poverty. They talk about breaking the cycle of poverty. They talk about helping people escape from poverty traps. Notice the destructive language. We've got to figure out how it works and then somehow defeat it, sabotage it. The same language of sabotage. But anyway, you notice the effect of big party politics. And if you want to get support for your mission, however your organization is constructed between these two sides, whatever your operational balance is between the two approaches, it matters what language you use. Do you think that it's conceivable, a particular period in your professional tenure, actually you are running a ruthless enforcement campaign against serious industrial polluters, but you have a right-wing government? And so it's actually better for you to describe your approach as promoting environmental stewardship. Is that plausible? The language and labeling is one side, while most of your effort is on the other side. Perfectly plausible. How often do the political winds of change in this country? At least every election cycle, often much more frequently, depending on what did or did not happen last week, right? So simple corollary from this one, yes, do your operational design, review it incrementally, periodically, slowly and carefully, once every 3 or 5 years, and at the same time accept that your political communication strategy is decoupled. It needs to be decoupled so that it can respond a lot more quickly to the prevailing times. Time for coffee. I've got all the signals I need, and I'll let you close up and tell them when to come back. Thank you.